Texas. The Striker Texas, as you should know or you know at this point, it's a new soccer platform that's going to cover. It's covering soccer in all levels of the sport, from MLS all the way down to the youth and the amateur rankings. You have ways to communicate with other fans, other people on the platform. So we're very excited. We launched it last week, and to celebrate this and to celebrate our mission, which is to help develop soccer in the state of Texas, to help educate people about the sport that we love in the state that we call home. We created this conference, and today I have the pleasure to host one of the most exciting panels of the day, or even the whole conference. So I would like to welcome the three guests, and I would like to start presenting Andres Zanota, a friend of mine that comes also from Brazil, like I do. Andre is the technical director of FC Dallas. Andre, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your career?
Hi, Roberto. Thank you for inviting me. It's wishing all the best to the striker. It's always good to have more and more talking about soccer in the state of Texas and in the U.S. So as you said, I'm from Brazil. I did my career working as a sporting director in some of the top clubs in Brazil, such as Santos and Grêmio. And in 2000, the end of 2018, I was invited by the Hunts, the owner of FC Dallas, to come to this club, and now I'm going to my third season here, and it's been great. It's been a great journey, and I'm really enjoying being here. See the growth of the MLS. I lived in Texas. 1997, 1998 as an exchange student, studying in Northwest High School in Justin, Texas, about 30 minutes from here, and coming back after 22, 23 years to the same place and see the growth of soccer, how the sport has grew grown in this country. It's great to see it. So and it's even more fun to be part of it, and in such a great club like FC Dallas, and it's an honor also to be sharing this panel with Tab and with Andy, guys that are also now, and Andy with Austin and Tab that came last year to Houston, just helping the Texans teams to become stronger and represent the state better and better in the MLS.
All right, thank you, Andrea. Andy, let's jump here back to Austin. You're a few miles away here from our headquarters here on the Striker Texas, here in Austin, Texas. Andy, you came from different sports, a successful, a professional life on the business side of our not just our game, but on other leagues. Can you tell us a little bit about your career?
Again, thank you for having Austin FC participate. Thank you for having me on. Great panel. So my career is a little like many of us who find ourselves in Major League Soccer. I've had a previous life at another team. In my case, yes, I've worked in NHL. I worked for the Detroit Red Wings back in the late 90s. For your hockey fans out there were some pretty successful years. We won a couple of championships. Then I went to launch an NHL team in Columbus, Ohio, the Columbus Blue Jackets. So I got my first taste of what it's like to launch a new team and open new buildings simultaneously. And I've more recently, I was the president of Columbus Crew from 2014 through the end of the 2018 season, when Anthony Precourt and I and about 15 others of us from Columbus transitioned down to Austin to launch our operations here in the state of Texas. So I've been full-time on the ground since January of 2019.
All right, cool. And well, our third guest, I'm not going to ask him to introduce himself, because if I do, we would need a 3 or 4 hour panel here, right, Tab? Just telling us the amount of World Cups and as a player, as coaches that you have been. But no, I have the pleasure to have with us Tab Ramos, current head coach of the Houston Dynamo. Tab, welcome. And again, you don't need to introduce yourself, but if you can just if you want to say some words, welcome.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for the introduction. Uh, I mean, thank you for putting it that way. Anyway, it's nice to be on your show here. Congratulations on this new platform that you're starting, Striker Texas, and it's great to be on with Andy and Andre. Hopefully, between all of us in Texas, we can continue to sell the game. I feel that Texas has been on the U.S. map for a long, long time, and I feel like we keep making it stronger and stronger. So thank you for. I'm very happy to be here in Houston, and thank you so much for having me on.
All right, cool. So we're trying to respond a question here on this panel, right? Can Texas become the MLS model state? I think before we try to answer that question, I think it's important for all of us to discuss a little bit. Where are we now overall, right? So I would like to start with you, Tab. Just before you came to Texas, right? And I would say that you have lived professionally with soccer since soccer has become an important piece of this society overall, of the U.S. society, since I would say '94 is where I personally consider where the sport really became relevant in this community. Um, how did you, when you were in the U.S. National team, or when you were in New Jersey, growing up, and how would you see Texas overall, the relevance of Texas within the market of soccer in our country?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because although if you live in Texas for a long time, you may think that Texas, where it's starting to arrive. The rest of the country has seen Texas be a big player in soccer for many decades. I can recall when I was growing up. I can recall clubs like the Longhorns in Dallas being one of the bigger clubs in the country. If you had an opportunity to travel with your youth team and come play in Texas, go to Dallas Cup and play against the Longhorns, you knew you were playing some of the best talent in the country. Texas in general has been known for having great athletes. It was a different kind of soccer than, for example, we played on the East Coast. But I think that Texas has always been a big player. And as of late, so that I don't go through the whole, because I'm sure we're going to be answering a lot of questions. And now, over the last 7, 8, 9 years, FC Dallas's growth through their academy and what they've done, to put players on all levels has sort of been the leading organization nationwide, and forced the rest of the country to kind of look to Texas for talent, and so I think that's been a great thing as well.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, right? We all know the pyramid of soccer, and for the model of the business worldwide, the youth is an important piece, and we can easily say, like you were stating, Tab, that Texas has, maybe if not the top, is on the top three amount of people playing on youth and amateur overall, and Dallas is historically one of the strongest one. I would personally say maybe the strongest one today in the United States on the youth side. So, Andre, how do you see the importance of how is the relevance of your academy on the process of trying to make FC Dallas a relevant club in the United States?
So yeah, this is for us in our club here. The youth team, the academy, the process to reach the first team is in our DNA. We want to always have players, homegrown players, players that went through our academy, went through the whole youth system of FC Dallas, from academy to up to the first team. We have so many examples of players that are right now in our first team, and we're starting to build, uh, have a reputation of having players, such a high quality players, that players are reaching at the highest level of soccer in Europe, such as we just had Brian Reynolds, a player that started 15 games for us, and we had an amazing interest from top clubs in Italy in him. So it's crucial for us. We spend a lot of attention and keeping growing that the this importance of the academy. We see how things have been developing here, and I see here in the state of Texas, this soccer culture is stronger than in other parts of the country. From for me and for you, Roberto, coming from where we come from, where soccer is just part of our life since we are born in Brazil, and then leaving here, as I said, in the United States 22 years ago, and coming back now, I see especially here in Texas, and the soccer is becoming bigger and bigger. So
Yeah.
we have to take advantage of this, and trying to find players, bringing them to our academy. And we know we have very good coaching staff in all different levels, and we believe in the process, in the development, how we can make players become top players in soccer. So this is what we expect. This is what our fans expect us to keep believing in this process, and keep having players such as Jesus, just as Paxton, such as Thomas Roberts, and Tanner Tessman, players that went through our system here and now are playing in top level. Some of them, like Tanner and Jesus, just played the senior national team recently.
Very interesting. I'm going to make two questions to you, Andy. One related to what Andrea just said, and I'm sorry if you can't respond that. I'll understand. But Dallas just made maybe the biggest sale of the history on a player wise, right? The biggest revenue on a single player on the past 2 weeks. You as an expansion franchise, how much are you expecting, or when are you expecting to have revenues, or how important is the revenue out of player side to be able to make it a successful franchise on the business side, right? I guess on the budget, that revenue is an important piece of the whole puzzle for any soccer team. How are you looking at that within Austin FC?
So you're right. There's probably some of that we're not going to answer. But I do think as an MLS team, we're part of a growing league that is now in position to have this conversation. Whereas when I first joined the league in 2014, it wasn't as big of a conversation talking about potential transfer revenues. It's kind of the next horizon in MLS. And yes, for teams that perhaps have struggled with, not talking about struggling with player development, struggled with revenue, this is an opportunity and perhaps motivation to boost player development. And now with the success of what you've seen with some recent transfers of Americans and Canadians, it's real, it's upon us. But Austin FC does not view this as a critical revenue path. This is just a critical development path, and it's part of us growing up as a league. And when we grow up as a league, we then have other conversations about TV rights, and we have other conversations about acquiring players who are in a different part of their career trajectory. Maybe they're going to come to us when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, as opposed to when they're 31, 32, 33. So it's all part of the model. But I would say that it's an opportunity versus something that is maybe slipping away from us. So this is all upside. And just to answer the earlier question, or you guys were talking about sort of shaping Texas, or how is this sizing up? I mean, the three of us represent a little more than 10% of the current league structure, right? 10% of the MLS teams, if we talk about the next wave of expansion teams, will represent 10% of the league. We're at the top of the pyramid. We're a big piece of I guess the league overall. But if we think about on the development side, one example that comes to mind, that's what is the opportunity in Texas? Big clubs are on the youth side. Big clubs are maybe 500, 750. 1,000 kids. Those are big clubs in the United States. In Austin, there's a club, Lone Star, that's 7,500 kids. And I think that just gets a sense of the scale of the state. Of course, we're growing. In 20 years, we will probably be the largest state in the union, which means that we will have the largest natural talent pool in the union. And we have major markets, and we have growing infrastructure. And all of these things will feed into player development. So I think for us, we're well positioned as a state.
No, that's very interesting. My second question to you, Andy, on this process is one of the panels that we have tomorrow is actually the first panel tomorrow is with the marketing people from some of the MLS and the USL teams trying to respond. Hey, how do you market soccer in a football state? right? How do you do that? And going back to the concept of the expansion franchise that you have, how how do you see this battle against this big football fighter against you, everything that you're doing? How do you see that?
Well, we think that there's room for all of sports to exist in the state. I mean, the state is so large that, so in all sincerity, we don't view it through a competitive lens. And I recognize we're in a different situation than our counterparts in Houston and Dallas, right? In Austin, we're the only major league team in our respective market, not the case in Houston and Dallas. So we have less concern over that concept. And I do recognize it is a valid concern. In our particular market, there's a strong history of high school football, certainly a strong history of college football. But I'll just give you one insight that we kind of look at, and it allows us to size the market a little bit differently. TV ratings. When we take a look at what University of Texas does on an average Saturday afternoon or Saturday night when they're locally televised, whether it's a national television or regionally televised game, we know what the ratings look like. If we were to compare that to, let's just say we compare it to what Ohio State does in Columbus, another market that has an MLS team and has a big college football program. What Ohio State is doing from a ratings-wise perspective is about twice of what University of Texas does, and that just means that the energy around ball in Austin in particular is just a little different. Not everybody is all in on, let's say, University of Texas. So for us, we certainly know that it's something that we need to be aware of. But in all sincerity, it's not an element that we are overly concerned with. I do recognize we have a bit of a luxury that the other two teams don't, and that we are the only team in our respective market.
In Andy, I do believe that part of what you're saying is the fact that maybe today Texas is the most international state in the whole country. Maybe if not, again, not the most one, it's on the top of that. And then my question to Tab goes on that route is. Um, we have such a mix on the field side, right? With the especially with the Hispanic, there's some studies that shows that sometimes over 50% of Texas speaks a second language. Most of them, is Spanish. How does that influence on the moment that you're creating the team, and at the same time when you're building a team to win your games? Are you also considering the environment on the city and the things that the city is bringing to you uh, to make your decisions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say yes to all that. So yeah, of course, Texas, has a variety of different people. When you, first of all, when you build a team, you don't necessarily, with the people you have available, you don't necessarily consider, do we have one of this, or do we have enough Spanish speakers? But what you try to do is try to identify with the city, and that's something that I felt when I arrived here in Houston that it was missing a little bit. Like, how do we? At the end of the day, we're Houston. How do we represent Houston? How do our players represent Houston? How do they contribute to the community of Houston? How do they represent every fan when they're out on the field? Like, we need that. We need guys who are going to sell the sport. We need players who love the club. We need that, and that's important. What I can say is, if you look, if you look at the bigger markets in the country who have developed players into say the national team, because that's an area that I knew best coming in here. So when we were very specific in terms of, how do we scout for national teams? Where do we find the best talent? And the best talent happened to be in areas that had a wide variety of different cultures and people. So you looked at New York, Philadelphia market, you looked at Texas, mostly Dallas, and then you looked at Southern California, LA through San Diego. Those were the markets where you looked for the most players. That's where most of the national team players, if you had to make an educated guess and you only had a limited budget on where you're going to find players, if you took those three markets, you'd be pretty well set putting a national team together. And I think that's something that we need to continue to build. But I think it's always important that, the players that play in Texas identify with Texas and the values of Texas, same as I would do, with the players in Houston.
Nice. My next question, and I would like to maybe expand it to the three of you. I'll let Andrea respond first. maybe not so much related to Texas, but to MLS overall, right? And if we're talking about how international the market is more and more, and I'm a true believer that that's one of the reasons. And going back to Andy's comment, I moved to Austin 7 years ago. I'm a soccer guy. I don't really I'm not really interested about UT. I'm interested about soccer. Do we have soccer in town? That's my sport. That's who I'm going for, and I'm going to try to figure that out. And with the influx of people coming to our state, there's a very hard understanding of the, especially of the international people or even the American that follow the sport in other countries, with the rules of MLS, the limitations that MLS creates on the player, on the salary caps, and all of those things. So my question to you, Andrea, how was your process on adapting, coming from the free world of soccer, where you can do almost whatever you want, to come to a place where you have some limitations? And I would like to hear a little bit of later on from Tab how that impacts his team building, and then from Andy, how does that impact the club overall, the business strategy of it.
Well, we're working in clubs in South America, especially the big ones that I did. It is a big challenge, and it's not a free world. It's a wild west. It's a very wild world there, and we have to deal with that. That's why we see so many South American clubs struggling financially so much, because the form of a constitution, how the clubs are associations with the presidents, and changing every 2 3 years, and people wanting to stay in power, and coming here to the MLS. It was, at first, I follow American sports since I lived here. I kind of knew, obviously, how the American system and the American sports works, and I see, and for me, I knew, but when you face all the rules and the specifications that MLS has, it's a big challenge, because there's some particularities that you don't see anywhere else. But obviously, after now being a third year here, I feel much more comfortable. But it's still learning every day, and every deal that we make, especially within clubs in the MLS, I learn more and more. But I think it helps. It helps you have a better control, especially when I have an owner here that is daily with us. Like, he participates a lot in every decision we make, and so I understand better how important this it is to have this type of control that the MLS imposes, if I can say that, in the clubs, and with the salary cap, with the foreign restrictions. But I don't think this is right now, and the MLS created rules throughout the time, before my time here, that allow the clubs to adapt, and still in tr- make the clubs bring players, quality players, from international markets. Still, MLS still attracts international stars. We have Higuain playing for Miami. We have Nani playing for Orlando, Chicharito, Carlos Vela. So players that had amazing careers, and we're now seeing, for a few years from now, Ezequiel Barco in Atlante. We see now Brenner, that just signed with Cincinnati. It's a player that had an amazing year in Sao Paulo. So even though we have these restrictions, the MLS created ways throughout the years that clubs are being able to still bring young, or players with a lot of quality from different markets. There are continue to make the product better, continue to help the league grow. So I think it restricts, obviously, in some ways, but I don't think it's the clubs are adapted, and they're making it work in the best way they can to keep to keep growing the league, and to keep attracting high quality players to play here in the U.S.
So Tab, how do you position yourself? Do you think that those limitations help us develop the game overall, or do you think that those are even more make it more challenging?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's really up to me to decide if it makes the game better necessarily. But I think, as Andre just said, I think you have to adapt to whatever mechanisms are available to you and take advantage of those mechanisms the best you can. And so sometimes it's going to be through some, negotiations throughout the league, and sometimes it's going to be by getting players overseas. Sometimes it could be an expensive player. Sometimes it could be a not so expensive player, a younger or an older one. So depending on what, some of the players that Andre mentioned, some of them are older, but now we see with Cincinnati's signing of Brenner, you're looking at a younger player who is a big time player. So there's a little bit of everything. Every club has a different formula for moving forward, but I think what's important is to adapt to whatever the rules are, and they're certainly not easy. I grew up in this country. I played in the league. I've known the league my whole life. I followed it always. And when I became a head coach, I was still surprised by a lot of things that I didn't know. And I'm learning every day because MLS is difficult and the mechanisms are difficult, and so I continue to learn every day. But it's like Andre said, you just have to, okay, we can do this, but if we do it this way, it doesn't work. But if we do it that way, okay, so then we can, and you're constantly having those conversations. But you have to adapt to what you have. I think one of the things that's important about MLS is moving forward. And that's positive. We're at a moment now where, you look at what's happening in Spain, what's happening in a lot of countries from around the world. Soccer is having a difficult time, obviously because of the challenges of COVID and all that. But at the same time, it hasn't been a smooth, last, 5, 6, 7 years for soccer worldwide. And yet MLS continues to take little steps forward. And I think the best is still yet to come. So I think we are doing a lot of things right, and we have to focus on those.
I'll
Andy,
jump in.
so yeah, I was just to add a little bit of a spice on the question there is saying when you're trying to sell those rules, they're already hard for people like Tab and Andre that are really in-depth knowledge on the MLS, and those rules are still hard to understand sometimes. Uh, how do you communicate? How do you use that on the business side to communicate with your season ticket holder or your or your overall fan? To explain to those people like myself when I moved here that had no idea what those rules were. Is that relevant? Maybe that's my question. How relevant it is for them to understand that?
So on the business side, or the commercial side, I would argue that it's not nearly as relevant. There are certain segments of the MLS audience that are going to be extremely in tune with some of the player acquisition mechanisms, and they're going to compare them to other leagues throughout the world, and they're going to view them as dissimilar. And that's okay. I think, there's some really nuanced, conversations that will go on about promotion and relegation. And in the end, that's fringe. It is a very small segment. And by the way, it's healthy, fun debate. But ultimately, what I would say is, to answer your question, no, that's not anything that will be a major impact when it comes to season ticket membership or sponsorship. It's a lot about delivering audience, delivering an excitement inside of the stadium, and those I think are the critical aspects. It's less about how you're acquiring players, at least on the business side, where I think from viewing this less about the rules and just more about our league. Our league, to Tab's point, our league provides growth. We're in the 26th year of Major League Soccer. If you were to view the first 26 years of MLS against the first 26 years of the other 4 major leagues in North America, I think you'd be pretty impressed with the growth that MLS has been able to endure. One of the reasons why we're able to grow is because we're progressing, but we're progressing in a very stable fashion. So stability is another aspect of Major League Soccer. We manage our growth responsibly. Whether it's soccer or technology, if you try to grow your business too quickly, you can irresponsibly spiral out of control. I would say that MLS over the last 26 years has responsibly grown. Of course, another aspect of our responsible growth, and I think this is an important differentiator, if you compare the rules of the league, let's compare infrastructures as well. And so I think our facility development is just another significant aspect that allows our league to grow. It certainly allows business to grow. And that's a big point of differentiation. So yeah, there's some really nuanced player mechanisms thing that I think are fringe elements, but largely most fans are interested in stadium experience and championships, less about the player mechanisms.
Oh, I love where we're going with the discussion overall. I think we were able in this first 30 minutes to really be able to, uh, 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 you know, uh, lay out the land on the three teams and on the state. And it's interesting that you said, and I had made a list here. I was trying to put here what was the biggest success or the investment that was done by the three teams in Texas so far. And we can say, Dallas has invested a lot on the youth side. Is a team that has the investment on a USL1 team that they own, and we know that's some cost. They just invested on the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, making it even a stronger organization and bringing that attention to our state. If we talk about Houston, the stadium, the experience of the stadium is amazing. They have the investment on the dash, also believing on the development of the soccer on both men and women, which is great, and just invested very heavily on the rebrand. And with Austin, the stadium, which I had the pleasure to visit a couple of months ago, it's also going to be an amazing experience, and the investment that you're doing on the structure, also on the training facility at this point, and the front office that you put up together, which is, some might say, maybe one of the strongest front office of MLS today. So the teams have invested heavily outside the four lines, right? Have done that work. Uh, when are we going to be able, or do we need to make this state relevant, like LAFC that had, Vela, or some of the names that we just discussed a while ago? Do we need those names on the three teams of Texas to make Texas relevant, or there are other things that we are going to be able to do that? And I'll start that with Tab. Tab, do you feel that need of those names? And I'm gonna be fair with the other two. I think Tab has a stronger last name at this point to answer that hard question.
But I think I'm probably the person that should not be answering this question. What I would say is, how do we go about it in Texas? So, like I said before, I truly believe that Texas is already a big player. So I think if there's anything that we can do between the three of us, and we are three big clubs, we will continue to be three big clubs, and hopefully we can all grow more. I think we can only make Texas even more important. So this is not. I want to make sure that from where I sit and for where the rest of the country is watching, it's not like Texas hasn't existed and we're trying to put it on the map. Texas is already big, and not big because that's what everybody says. Everything big in Texas is big because soccer has been big in Texas for a long time. How can we be at the top of that? Well, sometimes it's easy to say, well, through investment. I'm not the person to speak about investment, but if tomorrow we sign Neymar and Mbappe, chances are everybody's paying attention to us. That's kind of how that works. It's sort of the law of the game worldwide. I think maybe we all have a different approach. Here in Houston, we feel that we're in a place where almost greater Houston is almost 7 million people. We're a country here basically. So how can we help Texas? We can help Texas by being the best Houston that we can be. Always being amicable to the other cities. I think Austin is going to be awesome. Really looking forward to that. I think Dallas is already awesome. I think they're doing a great job, and I think Houston can also do that. And we're by the way, we're a champion club. We won the league twice already, so there's that tradition that we have to bring back. So I believe that investment is part of it. I think that all clubs, we should have a bit of an obligation in terms of investing into youth development, because that's what promotes the game, and that's important. In terms of the investment at the top, I'm really not one to have an opinion on that. I'm sure Andy and probably Andre will have a better answer.
So I'll take that to Andre in that case, Andre, and And again, might be a little bit of a hard question to answer at this point. Um, we as and I was a general manager for teams for a long time, and we know the importance of the process of selling the players and generating that revenue, creating the brand that you have, and reinvesting that money that's sold. And there's a big question now at this point is, yes, Dallas has been successful in bringing those players to the first team, is now successful to sell those players. The question is the model, is that the model that we're going to go back and invest on the youth to make those players again? Or is there an intention of bringing a little bit of more senior players to this process?
Yeah, thank you, Roberto. I think it's a good question, and first of all, we never stopped investing in we're waiting or using the resources from trades transfer of players to invest in our youth system in our academy. We This is part of, as I said before, it's part of our DNA here, and we'll continue to invest. To We want to keep we want to be seen as the top academy, continue to be seen as the top academy in the MLS, and continue to provide the country and now more and more the world of soccer with talented players. So this is something that we'll continue to do, but Tab knows this well. When For you to have a strong team, and if you want to have a more balanced team, you cannot only rely on the young players. You need to mix with more experienced players that will help the development of the young players. We have Ricardo Pepi that scored a crucial goal in the first game of the playoffs against Portland away, that kept us alive and made us go through in the PKs. And he's in 03, but it's a lot of pressure for young guy to come from academy straight to the first team and already be the guy, the player. So I think having players like we have Matt Hedges, we have Jim Maurer that you just mentioned, and mixing up with also international players like we have Franco Hara, we have Thiago Santos, players that different backgrounds that they will help those players that we're developing here in our academy, making them reach the first team, and we want to make this pathway very smooth. That when they reach the first team, they're ready, but they still need, and we have a coach here and a coaching staff. They're really used to that. They like that. They enjoy training the youth players. They enjoy having this challenge and having this mixture of experienced players, young players coming in. We have Paxton now that unfortunately he got injured and couldn't play much of last season, but is a young player that is already a reference for the other players. And now we have Jesus playing in the first and the senior national team of the U.S. He becomes already a reference for the 03s, the younger players that we have in our roster. So I think this balance is very important. So we're not going to change that. We believe this is something Lucci likes to say. The star of our team is our team, is the being collective. It's not, we don't have a star. We have a very strong locker room with players that together we become stronger. We don't see this as something that FC Dallas will do. Obviously, as Tab said, it can happen. Maybe someday we bring Neymar here and then he becomes the star. But that's not what we think right now. That is it for us. We want to continue developing players, making them reach the first team, and adding those more experienced players to have balanced team. And then for me, the having sold Reggie Cannon was the senior national team player in August, and then we knew inside here that internally we had Brian Reynolds. That obviously I'm not going to say that we expected him to in 6 months be sold. Was not in our plans. It happened. For me, where I come from, I see a natural process when you have a player that has just brings such a high interest from the top markets. And then we internally we solved an issue that to replace Reggie. That was such a fantastic player for us, and we had Reynolds that did amazing. And now it's our job to keep finding the next one and keep developing the next one. Or if we don't have it here, we'll find it in the market. So that's my job. That's what Lucci's been helping me a lot. So that's the challenge that we have, and we'll continue to do that.
Very cool. So, Andy, if we were to write a book about the history of Austin FC, and we would write the last chapter today, we could say it's a very successful franchise. You guys haven't even played the first game, and it's literally a success franchise. Taking the same line of what we talked about in the last 15 minutes, how much of the success of the field, or how much of your success on the business side is going to depend on the field, and how much of the success of the field depends on the success of the business side?
Well, they're certainly connected. I don't think there's anybody who could argue that there's not a connection between ultimately the success of your on-field product. So in our case, and by the way, I'm not going to accept the fact that we're a success already. We will continue to strive to be the best. But thank you. I'd say in our particular case, we haven't played a game. You're right. And eventually the expectation will be we'll take the field, we'll field a playoff caliber team, we'll eventually become a championship caliber team, and we'll eventually need to continue that for years and years and years. And so the expectation will pivot from a team that can be sort of a might be great into a team that needs to be great. And in our particular case, we're prepared for that. And so, the original question was in terms of investment, what does that look like in terms of developing your success? Listen, I think everybody's success formula and relevance formula is going to be different in their own unique market. We talked a little bit about the differences between Austin, Houston, and Dallas. But in our particular case, I think you've got to make investments in your player development. We built out an academy program in 2019, knowing that our first ever MLS match would be in 2021. We started to build out world-class facilities. So we've got our $260 million stadium. We've got our $45 million training facility. That's an important part of our relevance. It's certainly an important part ultimately of our success. Building out the business side. Yeah, in order for us to continue to pursue the right amount of players and make the right amount of improvements to the stadium, and ultimately one day to our training facility, all these things will eventually have to happen. We're going to have a continuous revenue stream. We also need to have the right TV deal, right? We want to have, when we talk about distribution and growth, it all comes down to who's actually seeing your product if they're not inside of the stadium. So there's a lot of factors. Then, of course, there's the investment in your first team roster. And I think we've built out a partial roster thus far, and we'll continue to formulate our roster. But I think we've done a nice job of demonstrating an interest and an appetite to spend, and that, of course, will only grow as we go from partial roster to full roster. I don't think there's any way you could argue, though, that the business isn't connected to the soccer, and then the soccer is connected to the business. They are intertwined, and that's why I hope that your guests on this platform are having conversations like Claudio and I have our conversations with, between president and the soccer ops side. These are really important relationships for there to be an alignment. And I'm lucky, in Columbus, Greg and I had a phenomenal relationship. And I'm lucky that, here in Austin, Claudio and I have a phenomenal relationship.
Good. We had a panel this afternoon. Our first panel of this conference was, can soccer create space on mainstream media, right? And there was a phrase that came from the editors of the newspapers and one TV anchor of a big TV station in Houston, and they almost felt a little bit where it's not our responsibility, on their view, to develop the game. It's our responsibility to communicate to them if they already know if there's audience for that. So they say that they said the audience has to be shown first, then they're going to be able to show the sport on mainstream media. So back to you, Andy. Do you think that we're creating that in Austin, that audience to be able to open that space on the mainstream media?
Well, I think we're, again, I'll use the word relevancy. I think we're developing a pretty strong relevancy in our market. And one of the ways that we're able to do that is we've invested in the community. And that's one way to generate, discussion amongst the media, not just goals, assists, wins, moments. There's other ways that you can generate media attention. Of course, in our own market, I will always want more coverage. There's no such thing as enough coverage. I'll give you just sort of a baseline concept that I'll view. I think, in our particular market, I wouldn't be surprised in Dallas, in Houston, it's the same. But in our particular market, I feel like, a lot of the sports reporting community does a really good job at identifying the high school athletes. Doesn't matter what the sport is. Doesn't matter if it's girls or boys. Finding the high school athletes and publicizing their backgrounds and sort of their journey to college, their journey to signing day, their college scholarship. That's a big deal, right? That's a big deal for a local athlete. It's a local story and it's a successful story. Who doesn't like that? I think similarly, it's up to us as a team to try to make our signings just as relevant in terms of media coverage as some of like the signing days, and whether it's college football or girls soccer, girls tennis. That's one that I can sort of see an opportunity. And again, my own market, wouldn't be surprised if it's the same in Houston and Dallas, where we'd love to get sort of the general sports market, the anchors who cover all of the sports in this market, to be a little bit more in tune to our player signings and to get them just as excited about our player signings as they might be about signing days for high school athletes or college athletes. So that's a small example, but I think it's a micro example of something that we need to do a better job of articulating the value proposition of all of these athletes that we're bringing into our league.
Very cool. Tab, you said and you stated more than once on this last hour that Texas is already a strong state on soccer, right? That it is. I would maybe question, right? And again, maybe because of the size of California and the amount of MLS teams that they have now, and now with the expansion of some Sacramento, and maybe in the near future San Diego, which it's there's a lot of talks about that. What can we do moving forward to try to be even more relevant than we are today, and I think we already talked on some of the things that we could, but if you had the magic wand to say, hey, let's do this to make this, even more successful, where, even things like we're doing on the Striker Texas, I think it's part of that, right? Also communicating and talking about the sport, delivering information about it. What would you want to see more that you don't see, if there is something that we could see more?
Well, I mean, let's just pretend that the magic wand doesn't deliver money, right? Because if it delivers money, then you can buy whatever players, and you can be relevant right away, and you can get all the coverage in the world right away. So if we take that out of the equation, I think the best way we can help is, and I'm just going to focus on Houston, for example. So as I was saying before, our greater Houston area has 7 million people. We're basically a country. And we need to focus on that. I think for us to be sitting in a community that has almost 7 million people, begging for coverage doesn't make sense. That means we're doing something wrong. I think if we, and I can only look at it from my end, right? We have a huge city, and in this huge city, there's likely a couple of million people who really love soccer. There's likely something like that. And if we're not getting those people to the stadium, if we're not getting the attention from the media, I can only help from my area, and that is by winning games, by winning championships, by having players who take accountability for developing the sport. Yeah, of course. At the end of the day, what's most important is that the player goes on the field and that they play great and they give everything they have every single day in practice and in the games. But there's more of an obligation to that. Fortunately for me, I've grown up in this country, and I've always had the obligation to sell the game. And I want the players to also feel that responsibility, because we're not there yet. We talked before about how, we're continuing to take steps. And even though some of the other big leagues around the world, over the last 5-6 years, they really haven't taken steps forward. If anything, some of them have taken a step backwards. And yet for us, we just, our players in our league just signed an agreement until 2027. I'm not sure that there's another league in the world where something similar is happening. I think there's long-term plans, and I think they're gradual long-term plans. So from a league standpoint, everybody's doing a good job. From a Texas standpoint, I think we have three clubs, Dallas, who's already been there for a long time, but I'm sure Dallas wants to win championships. At the end of the day, you have a lot of development, you're selling players, but the fans also want to see championships. For Austin, the same. They come in and, the great facilities and a great stadium and an investment, and their fans at the end of the day, they're going to want to see championships. And us, maybe we do it a little bit different, but at the end of the day, we also have to win championships. That's what keeps fans coming along. And I think that for me, from a coaching standpoint, otherwise I talk too much about things that don't fall under what I do. I think we just have to win games, and we have to do good things, and we have to win. We have to do things on the field that the fans want to see, and that's how we grow the sport, and that's how we get more coverage. But we can't expect for people to cover us, and we can't feel sorry for not getting coverage if we're not doing something good. Like, we have to do something, and then the coverage will come. That's the way I see it.
I 100% agree with you, Tab. You talk about championships, and it's important to remind everybody on Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we have one of the panels is about the back-to-back championship that the Houston had in 2006, 2007. So we got some of those players on there. So log in on Saturday at 1 p.m. Andrea, we're on our last few minutes here. Um, you talked a lot about the youth process, and I said, the investment that you guys do on the youth and with the USL League One. What is the importance on that pyramid, on that process of developing, or let me change, how effective was having a USL League One team to be able to deliver the things that you're trying to deliver, and you're actually delivering at this point on the first team?
That's a very good question, and I particularly I really this is something I really enjoyed having this under 23 team or B team, whatever you want to say, in the clubs that I worked for before, and when I got here, the club had just created the North Texas Soccer Club that would play the USL League One in 2019, and we basically played only with our academy players. Were most of the academy players, and we won the league in the first year. In that year, we had Tanner Tasman, we had Edwin Cerullo, we had Brendan Cervania, we had Ricardo Pepe playing for that team in different moments. We had Brian Reynolds. Brian Reynolds, that's something that we mentioned. Brian Reynolds played the final against Greenville in November 2019 or late October 2019. A year later from that, he was having we're getting calls from Juventus, from Roma, from top clubs in Italy. So that shows how important it is. I think there are different ways that we can use the second team, and we've been trying to do that here. First of all, is to give more competitive experience to our academy players, so we get some of our best U19 players, some of the U17 players already playing with our second team, and giving them minutes playing, giving them a competitive game, so they're not playing only with the players on their age group. They're playing with like we say, real men, guys with 27, 30, 35 years old. We can play in the USL League One. So I think this helps them in the development. It's something that I mentioned before, to make them reach the first team level even more prepared to MLS level of competition. So I think it helps that. On the second aspect, it helps us in the scouting. So we have been adjusting the scouting with the same now. Just try to bring, when you bring up a young player, and we use the North Texas only, it's a U23 team for us. We don't have players above 23 years of age in that group. So we just signed and we announced last week the Alejandro Viniegra. Alejandro is the player from the Cruzeiro Academy. He's Brazilian and Mexican passport. He played in the Brazil U15 national team, Brazil U17 national team, and he's now in the Mexican U20 national team. And sometimes the transition, he played one game for Cruzeiro first team, but the transition for those young players, usually from the academy level straight to the first team, it's a big jump. So if you when you can provide him with this intermediary level, it will help him to adapt better and again reach the first team level on even more prepared. So we're bringing international players to it. So it's also a challenge for any international players. For me, it's a challenge coming uh, from abroad and just to adapt myself here, my family. So when we bring young player and straight to the second team, there's not the same visibility, the same pressure that our fans expect, the media expects for the player to perform. So we can help his adaptation better in the second team for those international players and see how they do here and before offering him or before making them jump to the first team level. So we're using the second team in different ways, and we believe this helps the definitely the development of our players here and players that we're bringing from abroad to reach the first team.
Very interesting. Well, I'm sorry for you guys. We're on the last few minutes here, and I'm sorry for some of the hard questions that I made to you. It might have sounded that I don't believe that MLS or soccer can't thrive in Texas. Is actually the other way around. We ourselves have done a great investment on this new venture, the Striker Texas, really believing on the space that overall the community wants what we're doing, right? But there was just nobody delivering that. So we really believe that we can be the reference. We believe that we can get there. And before we go away, I will hand off give the word back to you guys for your final statement. And again, I really appreciate. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge, Andy. Thank you. Please, your final words.
Well, thank you for letting me be on the panel. This was fun. Learned a few things as well. My final words are: I'm looking forward to competing against Dallas and Houston and creating a rivalry. And of course, rivalries are developed, naturally, not just geographically alone. But I think we got a really good chance of developing something special here with the three teams in this state. So, gentlemen, looking forward to being competitive starting very soon.
Very cool. Andrea, your final statement, please. Oh, we lost
Sorry,
Andrea's
I was.
sound. Oh yeah,
I'm
we're
back.
back.
I'm back. Just I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity. It's been great to uh, speak and to have this discussion and to hear Tab and Andy. I think yes, I,
I think we lost.
for preseason. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back. You're back, Andrea.
Sorry. So I've been in contact recently with Matt Jordan and Claudio Reyna. We have been discussing things that we can do together in preseason. The teams are going to be here, and so yeah, we want to keep helping and growing the game of soccer in Texas and in this country. So all the best to my fellow uh, clubs in the state here. That all the success now that we know when the season is going to begin. So we're all excited about this.
Very cool. Very cool. Tab, please.
Okay, I think this is the first Zoom I've been on where we actually didn't really talk about soccer. It was, not on the field like we're doing next. So it's it was a little bit different for me, but I've enjoyed it. So thank you so much for having me on. Thank you, Andy. It was great to meet you, even if it's this way for the first time. Andre, it's great seeing you. I wish everybody the best, and Roberto, I wish you the best with Striker Texas and what you're doing. I think we need more of this stuff, more conversation, and more of getting the game out there. So anytime you need me, I'm on board.
All right, thank you very much. So for everybody, we're the Striker Texas. We get to the end of our first day of the 2021 Texas Soccer Summit. We are back tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central Time. with a discussion about, making soccer matter in a football-loving state. A panel that's going to be presented by the Texas Mutual. It's going to be my moderator. It's going to be John Arnold, one of our senior writers. And we got Zach Emmons, a VP of Marketing and Communication from the Houston Dynamo and Dash. Sarah Noller, Director of Marketing and Communication from the USL team in El Paso, the El Paso Locomotive FC. And James Ruth, Senior Vice President of Marketing for Austin FC. Once again, I'm Roberto Silva. We're the Striker Texas, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.